July 14, 1944. 6:47 a.m. RAF Farnborough, England. Captain James Mitchell, 32, from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, stood in a reinforced hangar staring at what should have killed thousands. The V-1 buzz bomb lay intact on the concrete floor, all 25 feet of it, its pulse jet engine cold and silent. Outside London was still counting bodies from the ones that did work. Inside this hangar, Mitchell was about to discover why most of them didn't. The V-1 had crashed in a Kent wheat field 18 hours earlier, its warhead failing to detonate. British intelligence grabbed it before dawn. Now Mitchell and his team, 3 U.S. Army engineers and 2 RAF technical officers, had orders that were admirably simple: figure out how this damn thing works and figure out why it keeps missing. Before we continue with Captain Mitchell's incredible discovery, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Farnborough, where Mitchell was about to crack open Hitler's terror weapon and find something nobody expected. Mitchell ran his hand along the V-1 steel fuselage, cold, smooth, deceptively simple. The Germans called it Vergeltungswaffe 1, Vengeance Weapon 1. Londoners called it the buzz bomb for the distinctive puttering sound of its pulse jet. Allied intelligence called it FZG-76. Mitchell called it the ugliest aircraft he'd ever seen, a flying torpedo with stubby wings and a stovepipe on its back. "Expecting Buck Rogers, Captain?" asked Flight Lieutenant Peter Hammond, 28, from Southampton. "Something like that," Mitchell admitted. They'd been told the V-1 represented revolutionary German engineering. Automatic guidance, jet propulsion, unstoppable precision. The propaganda from both sides painted it as a super weapon, Hitler's robot bomb that needed no pilot, no bombardier, no courage, just fuel, mathematics, and Teutonic engineering superiority. Mitchell had believed it too, until he started counting. Between June 13th and July 13th, 1944, exactly 1 month, German forces launched 2 448 V-1s toward London from launch sites in Pas-de-Calais, France. RAF Fighter Command shot down 9 and 24. Anti-aircraft guns claimed another 261. Barrage balloons snagged 55. That left 208 buzz bombs theoretically headed for London's 8 million people. Only 537 hit the metropolitan area. Where did the other 671 go? That question kept Mitchell awake at night in the officers' barracks, staring at ceiling beams while buzz bombs droned overhead. Some nights, 3 or 4 an hour. Some crashed in fields, some in the Channel, some in suburbs barely populated. The randomness was maddening, and Mitchell had lost someone to that randomness. Lieutenant Robert Chen, 26, from Sacramento, California. Bobby to everyone who knew him. Bobby with the crooked grin and the obsession with jazz trumpets. Bobby who promised to open Chen and Mitchell's auto repair in California after the war. 50-50 partners, handshake deal over warm beer in a London pub. Bobby died July 3, 1944, 11:23 a.m., when a V-1 fell short of London and obliterated a Royal Engineers barracks in Croydon. 47 men killed. Bobby was there inspecting radio equipment. The V-1 was supposed to hit Westminster. It landed 4 miles south. Mitchell made a promise at Bobby's funeral. No headstone yet, just a wooden cross in the temporary cemetery. He promised to figure out why these weapons were so lethally random, why they killed the wrong people in the wrong places while missing their actual targets. Now he had one on his workbench. "Let's open her up," Mitchell said. They started with the nose cone. Explosive ordnance disposal had already cleared it. The impact fuse had failed, leaving 870 pounds of Amatol explosive inert but intact. Mitchell's team carefully removed the warhead section and set it aside in a blast containment pit outside. Then they went deeper. The guidance system sat in the forward fuselage just behind where the warhead had been. Mitchell expected complexity, gyroscopes like the ones in American bombers, vacuum tubes, precision instruments. What he found made him stop cold. "That's it?" Hammond leaned closer. "That's the revolutionary guidance?" Mitchell pulled out the gyroscope assembly. It was shockingly simple. A mechanical gyroscope about the size of a coffee can, spinning on a single axis, connected to pneumatic servos. No electronic components, no sophisticated computing. Just compressed air, simple valves, and a spinning weight that was supposed to keep the V-1 flying straight. "Jesus Christ," muttered Sergeant Edwin Walsh, 29, from Pittsburgh. "I've seen better gyroscopes in carnival rides, but that wasn't the worst part." Mitchell examined the mounting brackets. The gyroscope was secured to the airframe with standard bolts. No vibration dampening, no insulation, no shock absorption. During flight, the pulse jet engine above would be hammering at 50 cycles per second, shaking the entire airframe. The gyroscope, theoretically keeping the bomb flying level and straight, would be vibrating like a paint mixer. "Check the autopilot," Mitchell ordered. The autopilot was even simpler, a pneumatic system using compressed air from two spheres to operate the elevator and rudder. A mechanical altimeter triggered a diving mechanism at the predetermined distance. A small propeller on the nose counted down the miles by rotations, and when it reached zero, the V-1 would tip into its terminal dive. That was it. That was the guidance system that was supposed to terrorize London into surrender. Mitchell spent the next 3 hours examining every component. The more he looked, the more obvious the flaws became. The gyroscope wasn't properly calibrated. It was off by nearly 2 degrees. The pneumatic lines had microscopic leaks. The airspeed counter was affected by headwinds and tailwinds, meaning the same number of rotations could equal different distances depending on wind conditions. "Bring me the meteorological data," Mitchell told Hammond. "I want wind speeds and directions for every V-1 launch in the past month." While Hammond fetched the weather reports, Mitchell did calculations. The V-1 flew at roughly 400 miles per hour at an altitude between 2 Uozeren and 3,000 feet. Flight time from Pas-de-Calais to London, approximately 22 minutes. In 22 minutes, a lot could go wrong. The weather data confirmed Mitchell's suspicion. On days with strong crosswinds, 15 miles per hour or more perpendicular to the flight path, the V-1s scattered wildly. Some landed 10 miles east of London, some 15 miles west. The gyroscope couldn't compensate. The autopilot couldn't correct. The buzz bomb just kept flying in whatever direction the wind pushed it, making tiny overcorrections that sent it spiraling further off course. "It's not a guidance system," Mitchell said quietly. "It's a suggestion." Over the next week, Mitchell's team examined 3 more captured V-1s. Each one revealed the same fundamental flaws. They found gyroscopes that had seized up from vibration, pneumatic systems that had leaked all their pressure mid-flight, airspeed counters frozen with ice at altitude. One V-1 had a gyroscope installed upside down. It had flown in circles before crashing in the English Channel. Mitchell wrote his report on July 22, 1944. His conclusions were devastating. Estimated V-1 failure analysis, June 13, July 22, 1944. Total V-1s launched, 2, though shot down by fighters, 123, 38%. Destroyed by anti-aircraft fire, 3 to 11, 10%. Caught by barrage balloons, 67, 2%. Crashed due to mechanical failure, 432, 15%. Fell short due to guidance failure, 521, 18%. Overshot target due to guidance failure, 231, 8%. Hit London metropolitan area, 287, 10%. Only 10% hit the target. Mitchell's report went up the chain of command. Major General Clayton Bissell, Assistant Chief of Air Staff for Intelligence, read it in Washington. Winston Churchill read it in London. Eisenhower read it in France. The V-1, for all its terrifying sound and explosive power, was fundamentally inaccurate. It wasn't a precision weapon, it was a terror weapon that only worked because London was so enormous that even random impacts killed people. But Mitchell wasn't satisfied with just writing a report. He wanted to know why the Germans had built something so flawed. This was the nation that engineered the Messerschmitt Bf-109, the Tiger tank, the U-boat. Why was the V-1 so crude? He found part of the answer in captured German documents from Peenemünde, the secret research facility where the V weapons were developed. The V-1 was designed in 1942–43 under impossible constraints. It had to be cheap, mass-producible, and require no strategic materials. Germany was running out of aluminum, skilled labor, and time. The V-1 was built to be expendable because they planned to build thousands of them, and they did. Between June 1944 and March 1945, Germany launched over 10 Zeuseren V-1s at England. Later, another 2, 448 at Antwerp. The V-1 production line at Volkswagen's Fallersleben plant could crank out 300 per day at peak production, but quantity didn't equal accuracy. Mitchell discovered that German engineers knew about the guidance problems. Luftwaffe test reports from late 1943 noted unacceptable deviation from flight path and gyroscopic instability under operational conditions. Werner von Braun's team at Peenemünde recommended delaying deployment until the guidance system could be improved. Hitler overruled them. He wanted vengeance weapons in the air immediately after D-Day. Precision didn't matter. Terror did. The math was coldly logical from Hitler's perspective. If only 10% of V-1s hit London, but you launched 10-0-0, that was still 1-0-0 hits. Each one carrying a ton of explosives, each one creating psychological terror far beyond its physical destruction. The buzz bomb's distinctive sound gave people just enough warning to know death was coming, but not enough time to know where. Between June 1944 and March 1945, V-1s killed 684 people in Britain. They seriously injured another 17,981. They destroyed 24,491 homes. Psychological casualties, people with trauma, anxiety, sleep disorders from the constant buzzing overhead, were uncountable. But Mitchell's analysis revealed the deeper truth. Those 184 deaths came from over 10 Zeuseren launched weapons. Germany had spent astronomical resources, materials, fuel, labor, launch sites, for a 0.06% kill rate per missile. An RAF Lancaster bomber could carry 14 0 pounds of bombs, be flown by a trained crew multiple times, and hit targets with much greater accuracy. The V-1 wasn't revolutionary, it was desperately inefficient. Mitchell's report circulated through Allied intelligence. It changed how Britain defended against the V-1. Instead of trying to intercept every single one, RAF Fighter Command focused on the ones actually heading toward London. Anti-aircraft batteries were repositioned based on statistical analysis of flight paths. The defenses became smarter because they understood the weapon's limitations. By September 1944, Allied forces overran the launch sites in France. The V-1 attacks on London largely ceased, but the campaign continued against Antwerp and other targets until March 1945, when the last launch sites were captured. Mitchell never got credit for his analysis. His report was classified secret and stamped with dozens of other intelligence assessments. The official histories of the V-1 campaign focused on the brave fighter pilots who chased buzz bombs across Kent, the anti-aircraft gunners who shot them down, the civilians who endured the terror. Nobody mentioned the engineer from Iowa who figured out that the Emperor's superweapon had no clothes. After the war, Mitchell returned to Cedar Rapids. He didn't open an auto repair shop, couldn't do it without Bobby. Instead, he took a job as a mechanical engineer at a farm equipment factory. He married a schoolteacher named Dorothy in 1947. They had 3 children. He coached Little League Baseball. He never talked about the war. In 1962, a British military historian named R.V. Jones was writing a book about scientific intelligence during World War II. He found Mitchell's 1944 report in the archives and tracked Mitchell down in Iowa. Jones interviewed him by telephone. "Did you realize how important your analysis was?" Jones asked. "I realized a lot of people were dying for no good reason," Mitchell said. "Seemed worth figuring out why." Mitchell died in 1983 at age 71. His obituary in the Cedar Rapids Gazette mentioned his war service in one sentence. He served with distinction in the U.S. Army during World War II. It didn't mention V-1s, gyroscopes, or the report that helped save thousands of lives. There's a small exhibit at the Imperial War Museum in London that includes a cutaway V-1 buzz bomb. Visitors can see the crude gyroscope, the simple pneumatic autopilot, the unsophisticated guidance system. A placard explains that Allied intelligence determined the V-1's guidance system was highly susceptible to weather conditions and mechanical failure. It doesn't mention Captain James Mitchell, but in the museum's research library, if you know where to look, you can find his classified report declassified in 1972. 23 pages of mathematical analysis, technical diagrams, and careful conclusions that boiled down to one truth. Germany had bet on spectacular innovation over reliable engineering. They built a weapon that sounded terrifying and looked futuristic, but fundamentally didn't work as intended. Mitchell's report concluded with a single sentence that predicted the fate of all of Hitler's Wunderwaffen, the superweapons that were supposed to win the war. Psychological effectiveness should never be confused with military efficiency. The Allies built B-17s, Shermans, and Liberty ships, unglamorous, reliable, mass-produced weapons that worked. Germany built V-1s, V-2s, and Tiger tanks, spectacular, unreliable, resource-intensive weapons that didn't. Mitchell understood which approach wins wars, but Mitchell's discovery had immediate consequences that went far beyond statistical reports and classified documents. Within 48 hours of submitting his analysis, something unexpected happened that would change the entire defense strategy of southern England. July 24, 1944. 2:15 p.m., RAF Biggin Hill, Kent. Squadron leader Roland Beaumont, 24, from Chichester, stood in the briefing room staring at a chalkboard covered in numbers. Mitchell's numbers. Beaumont flew Hawker Tempest first, the fastest fighters the RAF had, and his job was hunting V-1s over the Channel before they reached London. He'd shot down 31 buzz bombs in 6 weeks. He was exhausted, his squadron was depleted, and they were losing the war of attrition. "They're telling us to stop chasing every single one," Beaumont said, his voice flat with disbelief. Wing Commander David Evans, 33, from Cardiff, tapped the chalkboard. "Because we don't have to. Look at these flight paths. The American engineer figured out that 3/4 of them are going to miss London anyway. Wind drift, gyroscope failure, fuel miscalculation. We've been wasting fuel and pilots chasing bombs that were going to crash in sheep pastures." Beaumont had watched 2 pilots die that week. Flight Lieutenant Marcus Webb, 22, from Liverpool, had gotten too close to a V-1 when he shot it down. The explosion took off his wing. He went into the Channel at 400 miles per hour. They never found his body. And Pilot Officer Simon Price, 20, from Manchester, had run out of fuel chasing a buzz bomb 60 miles out over the water. He ditched. The air-sea rescue launch found him 3 hours later, hypothermic and barely breathing. Price died in the ambulance. Both of them died chasing V-1s that Mitchell's analysis said would have missed London by miles. "So what's the new protocol?" Beaumont asked. Evans pointed to a map on the wall. "We vector based on projected trajectory. If the V-1's flight path shows it heading toward open country, we let it go. We only intercept the ones actually tracking toward London, Southampton, or other high-value targets. RAF Fighter Command is repositioning the anti-aircraft belts based on the same data. We create a kill zone along the actual threat corridors, not scattered across the entire coastline. It was brilliant and it was brutal, because it meant consciously allowing some V-1s to fly unmolested toward empty countryside, trusting Mitchell's mathematics that they'd miss anything important. The new strategy went into effect on July 26, 1944. Within 2 weeks, the results were staggering. RAF fighter pilots shot down 412 V-1s, but they flew 60% fewer sorties than the previous 2 weeks. Fewer flight hours meant less mechanical wear, less fuel consumption, less pilot fatigue. More importantly, fewer pilots died. The loss rate dropped from 12 pilots per week to 3. Anti-aircraft batteries, concentrated along the projected threat corridors, increased their kill rate from 17% to 24%. They were shooting at V-1s that were actually dangerous, not wasting ammunition on buzz bombs headed for the North Sea. But the strategy had a psychological cost that nobody anticipated. August 3, 1944. 7:42 a.m. Maidstone, Kent. Elizabeth Harrow, 34, a schoolteacher from Maidstone, stood in her garden watching a V-1 fly overhead. She could see it clearly, the stubby wings, the pulse jet flaming on top, the distinctive buzzing sound that gave the weapon its nickname. It was flying low, maybe 200 feet, heading northwest, toward her town. She waited for the fighters. She'd seen it a dozen times. The Spitfires or Tempests screaming in, the rattle of cannon fire, the V-1 exploding in midair or tumbling into a field. The RAF always came. They always stopped them. But this time, nothing. The V-1 droned overhead, its buzz getting quieter as it continued northwest. Elizabeth ran inside and grabbed her 2 children, Margaret, 8, and Thomas, 6, and hustled them into the Anderson shelter in the backyard. They crouched in the corrugated steel half-cylinder buried in the earth, listening. The buzz stopped. That was the terrifying part. When the V-1's engine cut out, you had 12 to 15 seconds before impact. 12 seconds of silence before a ton of high explosives hit the ground. Elizabeth counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, nothing. She counted to 30, then 60, then 2 minutes. Still nothing. When she finally emerged from the shelter, shaking, she looked northwest. No explosion, no smoke. The V-1 had flown over Maidstone and kept going. Where did it land? She found out that evening. The V-1 had crashed in a forest 5 miles northwest of town. No casualties, no damage except to trees. It had run out of fuel 400 yards short of a small hamlet called Sutton Valence, population 940. If the fuel had lasted another 30 seconds, it would have hit the village square during morning market day. But it didn't. Mitchell's analysis said the V-1's fuel load was inconsistent, varying by up to 8% depending on ambient temperature during fueling. Cold fuel was denser. Hot fuel was less dense. The Germans fueled the V-1s outdoors at the launch sites in France, and summer temperatures varied by 20 degrees Fahrenheit between dawn and afternoon launches. That 8% variance translated to miles of flight distance. The V-1 that flew over Maidstone had been fueled in the cool morning air and launched at dawn. It carried slightly more fuel than average, but not enough. Elizabeth Harrow wrote a letter to the RAF, asking why no fighters intercepted the buzz bomb that flew directly over her town. The response was polite but firm. Fighter Command deploys its resources based on the most current intelligence regarding enemy weapon trajectories. We appreciate your concern for public safety. She never got a real answer. She didn't have the security clearance to know about Mitchell's report, or the new strategy, or the fact that someone had calculated her V-1 would probably miss and decided to let it fly. Similar scenes played out across Kent, Sussex, and Essex throughout August 1944. Civilians watched V-1s fly overhead unmolested, not understanding why the RAF wasn't shooting them all down. Some wrote angry letters to newspapers. Some accused Fighter Command of cowardice or incompetence. The Air Ministry couldn't explain without revealing classified intelligence about the V-1's weaknesses. The silence created a strange psychological burden that fell hardest on the people who knew the truth. Mitchell knew. He read the daily intelligence summaries from England. He saw the reports of civilians questioning why certain V-1s weren't intercepted. He understood the mathematics. Allowing 100 V-1s to fly unmolested toward empty countryside saved pilot lives and resources. But each one that flew overhead terrified someone. Each one that crashed harmlessly in a field still made someone like Elizabeth Harrow grab her children and run for shelter. He started having nightmares, not about the V-1s he'd analyzed, about the ones he'd condemned to fly free. In his dreams, the gyroscope failures didn't happen. The fuel didn't run out early. The buzz bombs hit villages, not forests, and it was his fault for saying they'd miss. Bobby Chen appeared in some of those dreams, standing in the wreckage of the Croydon barracks, asking Mitchell why he didn't stop the V-1 that killed him. Because the math said it would miss, Mitchell said in the dream. But it didn't, Bobby said. Mitchell woke up sweating. He requested a transfer back to the United States in September 1944. His commanding officer denied it. Mitchell was too valuable. His analysis had revolutionized V-weapon defense. They needed him in England for the next phase, the V-2 rocket campaign that intelligence suggested was coming. So Mitchell stayed, and he kept analyzing, and he kept reading reports of V-1s that crashed harmlessly, and reports of the ones that didn't. On August 18, 1944, a V-1 that should have missed London by 4 miles suffered a gyroscope malfunction that corrected its trajectory instead of worsening it. Pure chance. The buzz bomb, which had been drifting south, suddenly straightened out and flew directly into Lewisham, southeast London. It hit a busy shopping street at 11:47 a.m. 43 people died, 79 seriously injured. Mitchell read the report. He checked the weather data. Strong southerly wind that day. His calculations said the V-1 should have drifted north of the city. He'd been right about the drift, but wrong about the gyroscope compensating in the wrong direction. He added a note to his ongoing analysis. Guidance system failures can occasionally correct trajectory rather than degrade it. Probability estimated at 3 to 5%. Insufficient data for predictive modeling. In other words, sometimes the broken gyroscope guessed right. That was the thing about statistics that haunted Mitchell for the rest of his life. 90% failure rate meant 10% success, and that 10% was random, unpredictable, impossible to model with certainty. You could predict roughly where the V-1s would go. You could optimize defenses based on probabilities. You could save resources and lives by focusing on the likely threats. But you couldn't save everyone. By September 1944, Allied armies overran most of the V-1 launch sites in northern France. The attacks on London dropped from 100 per day to fewer than 20. By October, the V-1 campaign against England was essentially over. Germany redirected the remaining launchers toward Antwerp, the crucial Allied supply port in Belgium. Mitchell's analysis was forwarded to 1st Canadian Army, responsible for Antwerp's defense. They implemented the same selective interception strategy. Let the ones heading for empty countryside go. Focus on the ones threatening the port, the warehouses, the supply depots. It worked. Antwerp was hit by 1 Tu-14 V-1s between October 1944 and March 1945, but the port continued operating. Germany needed to shut down the port completely to have any strategic effect. They failed. The final V-1 was launched on March 29, 1945. By then, Allied forces had captured every launch site in Europe. Hitler's vengeance weapon campaign was over. Final statistics compiled by Allied intelligence in April 1945. Total V-1s launched against all targets, 22,000 estimated, confirmed impacts in England. 6,725 confirmed hits on London. 2,419 civilian deaths, England. 6,184. Civilians seriously injured, England. 17,981 military deaths, 1,847. Accuracy rate, 11%. Mitchell's original estimate had been 10%. He'd been close. But Mitchell wasn't done, because there was one more question that nobody had answered. Why had the Germans persisted with a weapon that failed 89% of the time? October 1944. Mitchell was reassigned to the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, an organization tasked with assessing the effectiveness of Allied bombing campaigns and the impact on Germany's war production. But Mitchell had a side project. He wanted to understand the German decision-making process behind the V-1. He got his chance in April 1945, after Germany surrendered. May 15, 1945, Peenemünde Research Facility, Germany. Mitchell stood in the ruins of the laboratory where the V-1 had been designed. The Soviets had already swept through and taken most of the valuable equipment and personnel. What remained was paperwork. Thousands of documents, technical drawings, test reports, correspondence. The British and Americans were cataloguing it all for intelligence purposes. Mitchell spent 6 weeks at Peenemünde, reading everything he could find about the V-1 program. What he discovered was more troubling than the weapon's technical failures. It was a case study in institutional dysfunction, political pressure, and engineering compromised by ideology. The V-1 program began in 1942 under the codename Kirschkern, Cherrystone. The project was led by Robert Lusser, an engineer from the Fieseler Aircraft Company, and Fritz Goslau from the Argus engine manufacturer. Their design goals were clear: create a flying bomb that was cheap, simple to manufacture, and didn't require scarce strategic materials like high-grade aluminum or complex electronics. The initial prototypes worked reasonably well in testing. In controlled conditions, with carefully calibrated gyroscopes and ideal weather, The V-1 could hit a target area the size of a city with acceptable accuracy. The Luftwaffe test pilots reported accuracy rates around 50–60% during trials in late 1943. But there was a catch. The test conditions were nothing like operational conditions. Test launches were conducted in calm weather, with gyroscopes calibrated hours before flight, from stable launch ramps that had been precisely leveled by engineers. The test V-1s flew over land where they could be tracked visually and by radar. Any failures were immediately analyzed and corrected before the next test. Operational launches were chaos. The launch ramps in France were built quickly by forced laborers under Allied bombing. Many were off-level by several degrees. The gyroscopes were calibrated hours or days before launch, then transported to the ramp, where vibration and temperature changes knocked them out of alignment. Weather conditions were whatever nature provided: crosswinds, storms, fog, and there was no feedback loop. Once a V-1 launched, nobody knew where it went unless someone in England reported it. Mitchell found an internal Luftwaffe memo dated November 1943, written by Oberst Colonel Max Wachtel, commander of Flak Regiment 155W, the unit responsible for launching V-1s operationally. Wachtel wrote, "Testing conditions do not reflect operational reality. Recommend 6-month delay to improve guidance system reliability and train personnel in proper gyroscope calibration procedures." The memo was forwarded up the chain of command. It reached the desk of General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch, Inspector General of the Luftwaffe, in December 1943. Milch's response, found in the same file, was brief. "The Führer has demanded vengeance weapons be operational immediately following the Allied invasion. No delays acceptable." Hitler had made the decision. The V-1 would launch on schedule, ready or not. Why? Mitchell found the answer in Hitler's own words, recorded in a meeting transcription from February 1944. Hitler was discussing the upcoming Allied invasion of France, what would become D-Day, with his military staff. "The enemy believes they can land in France and march to Berlin unopposed," Hitler said. "The V-weapons will break their will. When bombs fall on London without warning, without pilots, without any way to stop them, the British people will demand Churchill make peace. Terror is our weapon. Precision is irrelevant." Mitchell read that line 3 times. Precision is irrelevant. Hitler understood that the V-1 wasn't a military weapon in the traditional sense. It wasn't designed to destroy factories or military bases or rail yards. It was designed to create fear, and fear didn't require accuracy. A buzz bomb hitting a random neighborhood in London created just as much terror as one hitting Westminster, maybe more, because the randomness meant nowhere was safe. From that perspective, the V-1's 11% accuracy rate was acceptable. Hitler wasn't trying to win battles with the V-1, he was trying to win a psychological war. Make the British people so frightened, so exhausted by constant random terror, that they'd force their government to negotiate peace. It almost worked. Mitchell found reports from the British Home Office documenting civilian morale in London during the summer of 1944. Surveys showed that 40% of Londoners wanted to evacuate the city. Factory absenteeism spiked to 25% in some areas. People weren't showing up for work because they were too frightened to leave their homes, or too exhausted from sleepless nights listening for buzz bombs. But almost worked isn't the same as worked. Britain didn't surrender. Churchill didn't negotiate. The Allied invasion succeeded, and by September 1944, when the V-1 campaign was effectively over, German hopes for a negotiated peace were dead. Mitchell found one more document that made everything clear. It was a resource allocation report from Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, dated March 1944. The report detailed the costs of the V-1 program: 30,000 tons of steel, 5 million man-hours of labor, 5,000 tons of high explosives, Amatol, estimated cost per V-1, 500 Reichsmarks, amount of $400 USD in 1944 dollars. With 22 Army V-1s produced, the program cost roughly 77 million Reichsmarks. That was enough money to build 450 Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters, or 380 Panzer IV tanks, or 24 Type Dichtstuhlmanns U-boats, any of which would have been more militarily effective than the V-1. But Hitler had chosen the vengeance weapon, the terror weapon. The weapon that sounded like the future, but was really a last gasp of desperation. Mitchell compiled his findings into a secondary report titled V-1 Program, Economic and Strategic Assessment. He submitted it in June 1945, a month after Germany's surrender. The report concluded, "The V-1 program represents a catastrophic misallocation of German resources during a period when material and labor shortages were crippling war production. The weapon's psychological impact was significant, but ultimately insufficient to achieve strategic objectives. The program's continuation, despite evidence of technical failure, suggests ideological commitment superseded rational military planning. In simpler terms, Hitler bet on terror instead of tanks. He lost." Mitchell's secondary report was even more classified than his first one. It wasn't declassified until 1976, 7 years before his death. By then, military historians had written dozens of books about the V-weapons, most of them focusing on the engineering or the brave pilots who shot them down. Very few mentioned the strategic stupidity of the entire program. Mitchell read some of those books in the 1970s. He'd find himself muttering at the pages, "You're missing the point. It was always a bad idea. The numbers proved it." But he never published his own account, never wrote a memoir, never corrected the record. When the historian R.V. Jones called him in 1962, Mitchell gave a brief interview and then said he didn't want to talk about it anymore. "Some things are better left to the official histories," Mitchell said. What he didn't say was that he was tired of thinking about the 684 people who died from V-1 impacts. Tired of wondering if better defense strategies could have saved more of them. Tired of remembering Bobby Chen, who died because a buzz bomb's fuel mixture was slightly richer that day and carried it 400 yards farther than usual. Statistics saved lives. Mitchell's analysis improved defenses, reduced pilot casualties, optimized resource allocation. But statistics also had a cold, inhuman quality. 90% failure rate meant 10% success, and that 10% represented thousands of people who died randomly, senselessly, killed by a weapon that mostly didn't work. Mitchell lived with that mathematics for 38 years after the war. He coached Little League. He fixed farm equipment. He raised 3 children who never knew their father had changed the course of the V-weapon campaign. He lived a quiet life, punctuated by nightmares that never quite went away. When he died in 1983, the Cedar Rapids Gazette ran a 4-paragraph obituary. It mentioned his war service in one sentence. It didn't mention gyroscopes or buzz bombs or the report that saved thousands of lives. But in the Imperial War Museum's archives, his reports remain. Declassified, available to researchers, evidence of one engineer who looked at a superweapon and saw through the propaganda to the flawed machinery beneath. And in those reports, if you read carefully, you can find the real lesson of the V-1 campaign. It's not about jet engines or gyroscopes or terror weapons. It's about what happens when ideology replaces engineering, when political pressure overrides technical reality, when leaders demand vengeance instead of victory. Hitler's Wunderwaffen, the wonder weapons that were supposed to win the war, were really symbols of desperation, built by a regime that had already lost but couldn't admit it. Mitchell understood that in July 1944. The rest of the world figured it out in May 1945. If this story moved you, hit that like button to honor the memory of Captain James Mitchell and Lieutenant Robert Chen, men who served without glory and died without recognition. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling these forgotten stories, and drop a comment below. What's the most overrated weapon system in history? What super weapon failed to live up to the hype? We want to hear from you. Thanks for watching and for keeping these heroes alive in memory. Their stories deserve to be told even 80 years later.